Hi everyone, I'm Jessica DiRuzza, and this is my YouTube channel, Trust Psyche. Thank you so much for being here with me today. I love coming on here and doing these live streams with all of you. Today, I want to talk about Mercury and Neptune as an archetypal combination in astrology, and I want to begin with a quote from Carl Jung. Our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe, and what happens in the macrocosm likewise happens in the infinitesimal and most subjective reaches of the psyche. That's from Memories, Dreams, and Reflections. I think that this understanding that Jung had about the nature of the cosmos and the nature of psyche, and that there's this sharing of this deep interiority, that the depths of the inner parts of human beings in our psyche is a microcosm of the depths of the interiority of the cosmos or of the universe. And that's where we get sayings like, as above, so below. That's also where we get our understanding of the holographic nature of reality, where we can see within the fractal part of a microcosm the connection of deep sympathy and mirroring of the macrocosm. But there's these kind of nestings that take place. So when you think of the Fibonacci sequence, or when you look at a spiraling galaxy, or you look at the movement of a baby being born, there's this commonality of this spiralic movement. And in that, I think, really contains this understanding of deep cosmic sympathy, that there's this quality of every single part as a whole on is nested. And I think that's a really good word to use. It's nested within these larger and larger parts. And so the human being, we find ourselves nested as these individuals um, within these greater circles of mm, or an organism, right? Where these parts in a larger organism. And I tend to think of the universe as an organism. And I tend to think of the quality of Mercury-Neptune that relates to timelessness and non-linear thinking. That when you think of the universe as one organism, then that is, I think, allows us to understand how, on one hand, there is no such thing as the past, the present, and the future. In Neptune's world, that is all happening simultaneously. All realities, all possibilities, all timelines are happening at once. And when you think of it as an organism, when you move from one part of the organism to another part of the organism, there is a sense of movement. And in that movement, there is a sense of an arc, of a telos, of a beginning, a middle, and an end. And as you move through space time, you do get the sense of past, present, future in Saturn's realm. You do get a sense of a linear story unfolding, but really it's one movement from one part to the other part. And so that gives us this quality of time, this gives us this quality of space. Yet, from the organism's perspective of Neptune, of the creative consciousness, sometimes thought of as the Godhead, or um, the gradations of translucent infinite light, it's not actually moving through time. It actually is all happening at once. And so Neptune allows us to dissolve the boundaries of the cognitive mind, of the rational, analytical, linear mind that we are each also trained to be in, especially in the Western paradigm. Our maths, our sciences, the way that we learn to read and to write and process information is all pretty Saturnian. There's a great sense of order and logic and rules. And that's why we see a decrease in the arts and the sciences, right? They're not as valued. Somewhat we tend to favor, the professions of doctors and lawyers more than we do of, let's say, the musician or the dancer. And we can see that in all kinds of things like compensation of money, opportunities to go to school. How many people's parents, said, the child said, I want to be a dancer. And they said, Good luck with that. I don't think so. So, you know, there are really deep implications here, vocationally and economically, in the way that we favor the way of processing and understanding reality from that more Saturnian lens. Whereas from the place of Neptune, when that dissolving of egoic consciousness and that dissolving of understanding time as past, present, and future, we actually get this whole other experience of reality. And this other information and knowledge can come in. And that's why Neptune is so connected to esoteric practices like astrology or tarot, numerology, the Enneagram, right? Because there are these other ways of knowing and understanding the human's experience, both in deep connection or cosmic sympathy with the larger world. And so Neptune really in that symbiotic ecosystem of its interconnected wholeness or oneness or unity, it allows us to access reality in a different way. That's why practices like meditation, qigong, anything that gets us out of our um, typical linear rational thinking, breath work, entheogens, these practices are by their nature innately Neptune. They're Neptunian because they get us to experience ourselves and our relationship to reality, and I believe the divine, in that sense of deep shared interiority, just like Jung was saying, that there is this profound cosmic mirroring, and that we actually see this as the structure or the nature of how the universe is set up. And that by understanding reality from that place, we can begin to appreciate an archetypal perspective on life, one that is symbolic, right? Mercury Neptune has to do with symbolic thinking. It has to do with maintaining that sense of childlike wonder and awe, right? Mercury Neptune is about really opening the mind to absorb and receive information from the higher self, information from the beyond, information from the non-physical world, right? So Saturn is the physical world, and Neptune is the non physical world. Saturn is the seen world, right? This chair, this pillow, this body, this face. But Neptune is the unseen world. It, in also in that way, can be thought of as the interiority, or what we might call the essence, the spirit, or the spiritual essence of a being. So, my soul, right? And I really actually like this distinction that the archetypal psychologist James Hillman makes, which is instead of saying, I have soul or my soul, we would change the language. And Mercury Neptune is very into this in Mercury's relationship to language, that it's actually I am soul, right? I am soul, not I have soul. I am soul. That's a very Mercury Neptune understanding of what soul is and what it means human. To kind of ground Mercury Neptune a little bit more in some everyday experiences. Right before I came onto this live, I was playing with my 9-month old daughter, Luce, and my husband, Travis, was playing Somewhere Over the Rainbow on the piano. And in that experience, I was holding Luce and she was watching and just kind of, she has Mercury Neptune, right? And she's just like, you can tell, just like absorbing what's going on. And at the end, I was like, can you clap? Can you clap? And for the first time ever, she clapped. And Travis first clapped, and then she looked at Travis, and then she clapped. That mimicking, that ability to kind of instantaneously absorb the essence of what's going on, and then to be able to mimic or mirror that experience, that's a very Mercury Neptune quality. And that's why Mercury Neptune relates to things like intuition and compassionate thinking. And if we continue on that spectrum, right, from intuition, empathy, highly sensitive being, highly sensitive thinking, sometimes that's why it ends up getting correlated to psychic abilities or telepathic abilities, because one's mind is able to enter into those more intuitive states of consciousness that one on the spectrum goes from intuition to the ability for certain levels of prophetic knowing or psychic knowing, including having prophetic dreams, right? It's not uncommon for people who have Mercury Neptune to have a very strong relationship with their dreams at nighttime, and for those dreams, as they all are, to be deeply symbolic, but to be able for the mind to understand. And this is Mercury's role in our chart, is to understand, to learn, and to think about these things. Mercury is the processing function of the mind that is able to create story and make meaning out of things. And if Mercury Neptune wants anything, it wants to make meaning. It's the aspect of, in part, the storyteller, or the one who wants to create a meaningful narrative. And so Mercury Neptune people who tend to both think symbolically and be highly intuitive also have that strong connection to their dreams at night, and for those dreams to speak to the person. And wherever Mercury is in our chart, that's how the world speaks to us, and that's how we understand things and educate ourselves and learn and receive messages. And Mercury Neptune has a lot to do with touching into the higher mind, right? So if we think of us here as humans, and then that direct line of connection to our higher selves and a higher mind, Mercury Neptune is about occupying that higher mind. I would be remiss if I didn't say that Mercury is square Neptune right now. So Mercury at 23 Gemini is in an exact 90-degree square to Neptune at 23 Pisces. This has been a long Mercury square Neptune that we've all collectively been sharing because Mercury stationed retrograde. So usually this transit of Mercury Neptune in the sky and hard aspect would last a week or two. But right now, it's lasting months because of this retrogradation of Mercury. So it's been very strong and very present. And something that I've noticed about it that I've really appreciated during this transit is that I've been having a lot of healing conversations. Neptune relates to the aspect of healing. It has to do with integration, and to integrate means to make whole. So whenever we're making something whole, that's a process of Neptune. Neptune's desire is for unity, and it's for wholeness. And so, in that wholeness, there is a healing. And in that sense, that the word religion, which also relates to Neptune in part, means to bind back. I think Mercury Neptune has a lot to do with weaving, right? Weaving a meaningful story, weaving conversations together through the words that we use, that the words we use become vehicles for healing. Mercury is Hermes, the messenger of the gods, and its relation to travel and communication has to do with the vehicle. So our words, our voice become a vehicle for meaningful connection and restoration back into wholeness. And so when I look back at this week in particular, I've had two very powerful healing conversations of pain that I have been carrying in my heart for many, many years. And I had two opportunities this week, to talk to an old friend that I hadn't seen in 5 years, and we got to go and recount the past and retell the stories. And I think Mercury Neptune really loves that. It's the ability to go and retell the story, to reframe, right? To understand that psychological quality that we use in therapy to reframe the story from one that maybe feels hurtful or painful or filled with shame or fear into one that is filled with a sense of empowerment. And I think that when we are in states of wholeness, you might hear my little baby out there crying. Uh, when we enter into these states of wholeness, I think that there is a very real visceral quality of attaining a sense of inner peace. And for me, when I know that something has been a healing for me, it's like my whole nervous system, which relates to Mercury in part, all of the little nerves throughout our whole body can settle. So when it settles, when my nervous system settles and I can let go and I can exhale and feel that sense of oneness again between me and my environment, it's a Mercury Neptune process that is taking place of this has been a healing conversation. So to get to go back in and retell the story and reframe it from a perspective that is more inclusive. And when I say inclusive, I mean inclusive of all the narratives and perspectives present, right? Mercury is the narrative, but it's also our perspective, right? It's our eyes, it's the way that we perceive things. So when we all get to be inclusive and sharing our perspectives and then to be heard with empathy, right? And Mercury Neptune is the ability to not only speak empathetically and compassionately, but to listen empathetically and compassionately. So Mercury is as much about speaking from the voice, from the throat, as it is about deep listening and that receptive function of Mercury. And so for me, one of the qualitative differences of Mercury direct versus Mercury retrograde is that during retrogradation, when Mercury is moving backwards, it's more in a position of reception. So for me, it's a more yin quality of time. And in that yin quality of time, we're able to receive information in a new way. And that's where deep listening during Mercury retrograde time periods is what's most beneficial. I believe that Mercury retrograde is set up within our solar system and therefore within the rhythm of the collective human psyche of the anima mundi, the soul of the world, to go retrograde 3 times a year for 3 weeks so that we slow down and take time to listen. My mantra for Mercury retrograde time periods is let it be revealed. In order to let something be revealed, it needs time. We need to practice the art of not only slowing down, but of surrenderance. And then letting through that process of letting go and surrenderance, something new to emerge that could not otherwise. So when Mercury is retrograde, it's more in its native place of listening and receptivity. And I think that's why we sometimes get into our human troubles when during the retrogradation we try to take action and forward movement because Mercury wants us to actually listen during that time. And then once it moves direct, as it has now, there's this feeling of picking up the pieces and then putting them back together and weaving it, hopefully, in a new way from the new perspectives that one has received from entering into this different state of consciousness. And I think it's important when we think about Mercury Neptune that we remember that, Neptune is consciousness and Mercury is the mind. So when we talk about states of consciousness, we're talking about Mercury Neptune. When we have an understanding of psyche, that we are in psyche, right? We are in psyche, and psyche is in us. Or when we think about the planets, right? That the planets, as these beings, are holding space for us. My dear brother and astrologer Matthew Stelzner, really has brought this into my awareness that the planets are holding space for us, right? They're holding sacred space for us to be here and have this human experience and to be embodied and to experience and to express all of these different archetypal energies. It's a very Mercury Neptune understanding of astrology, of the planets, of psyche. And again, I'm going to bring in James Hillman here. And I know I've said this before, but I think it's one of the coolest statements about the nature of reality, which Mercury Neptune loves to think about, is the nature of consciousness and the nature of reality. And that is that when we dream at night, those dreams both are inside of us while simultaneously we're walking around inside of them. And that speaks to the holographic nature of reality, brings us back to Jung's quote is our psyche is set up in accord with the structure of the universe. And what happens in the macrocosm likewise happens in the infinitesimal and most subjective reaches of the psyche. I walk around at night in my dreams, and those dreams are coming from inside of me. I believe that when we take on a Mercury Neptune state of consciousness and we allow ourselves to enter into a more meditative mindset, which is what Mercury Neptune's about, entering into a flow state of consciousness, things like music and dance and poetry and art, right? They bring us into these states of consciousness where we receive timeless, sacred information and downloads and uploads and channeling and inspiration, right? An inspired mind. That's Mercury Neptune. we are able through that meditative mindset to sit and reflect almost like in lotus position for a lifetime around that. I walk around inside my dreams, and yet the dreams are coming from inside of me. I believe that this is how archetypes work. I believe this is how psyche works. I believe that this is how astrology works. And as someone who has Mercury-Neptune conjunct in my natal chart, I feel a deep affinity for these practices and these ways of being and these ways of knowing, right? Mercury is how we know things. And Mercury-Neptune is a way of knowing. It's a spiritual way of knowing. It's a way of learning through parable. It's a way of learning through story. I learn best by hearing people's stories. And that's why I love being an astrologer, a counseling astrologer, and a psychotherapist, because I get the privilege of sitting in sacred space and listening to people's stories, which for me is sacred. And in that sacredness, there's healing that takes place. It's so amazing to me that it works. That my being in therapy works for me, that being a therapist for other works. And I think that great chain of being is something that Mercury Neptune really speaks to. I hold sacred space for others, and so therefore others hold sacred space for me. I show up and do this work of uh, allowing for the heuristic part of the psyche to come about, which I believe is capable of healing. And I think we need to define what healing means here. And the importance of me continuing to do my spiritual practices and be in spaces where it's about me being on the receiving end of that healing. Just as Mercury retrograde is about listening, I believe that when we take these practices seriously, I'm ethically required in my own self to be in right relation with my own self, and therefore others to move from in to out, to be on the receiving end of all the practices that I give to others. So I get readings as much as I give readings. I receive therapy as much as I give therapy, right? This is a Mercury Neptune understanding of connection. Um, I am going to end here for now. I think there's one last thing I want to say, which is about how do we define what healing is. I think there's so many definitions of healing, and I think Mercury definitely likes to define things, right? The mind likes to know, likes to understand, and part of the way we do that is by defining things. So, what is healing, right? I mean, I think this definitely needs to be a whole other live stream. Maybe I'll do this on my next Trust Psyche podcast. But for me, healing needs to have a lot of different words. You know, we'll hear this a lot about other languages other than the English language, that there will be, you know, 100 words for love or a dozen words for a tree or for snow. I think we also need that for healing. There are so many different kinds of healing. Um, for me, I think just to briefly capture it, what is at the essence of healing for me when we're talking about at the energetic, psychic level, which is what Neptune relates to, the energetic body, the auric body. Um, I think we're talking about the most compassionate and loving affirmation of all that there is. So let me take a human example of that. Let's say I'm in therapy and I'm talking about something that's disturbed me this week. I've had an interaction with someone and it's bothered me, and I have a lot of emotion about it. Mercury Neptune says you get to fully have whatever feelings you're having about that, no matter what those feelings are. And you get to take all the time that you need to have those feelings. And it's not about fixing it or correcting it or making it right or making it go away, right? That's all more kind of a masculine mode of consciousness. It's about the deepest, most compassionate affirmation by being witnessed through the eyes of the other, Mercury, Neptune, being reflected and seen through the eyes of the other in a compassionate way, to learn to love those parts of ourselves that get hurt, the inner child who is innocent the inner child who is vibrant and bright, but also that needs protection, right? I think that Mercury Neptune's relationship with childlike wonder and awe is also about how we find ways to practice, and it's a practice, unconditionally love those parts of ourselves. In my experience, it's a very simple idea and probably the hardest thing to do. I know it's the hardest thing for me to do, and I have been practicing this for um, 14 years now, half a Saturn cycle. And I'm really blessed to have an amazing therapist who continually um, helps me come back to myself in that place of love and loving all those different parts of myself, and being with the incredible layers and nuances and complexities that are there that I think are a part of a human experience. And I think that, and I'll end here, is that when we decide to go down the path of being devoted to staying connected to our inner selves, it becomes this oh, lifelong experience of learning how to embrace our humanity. Meaning that, you know what, I get hurt and I get sad and I feel jealousy and sometimes I feel judgment and I judge myself and I criticize myself. And you know what? That's okay because that's human. And when I take the time to be with that, in my experience, there is a coming through the other side that is the most holy reunion that I've ever experienced in my life of self touching self. I think at the moment that loose came out of me was a moment of deep self touching self. And I hope and that those of you who are listening might understand what I mean by that. And for me, that's healing. And that ultimately, that's something that happens in and through relationship. And I think that Mercury-Neptune is the ability to have healing conversations with people around places that need to be restored and redeemed, um, to help heal the heart and therefore keep it open. Thank you so much for being here with me. I always love coming on here and doing these live streams with you. The best way you can show your support is subscribe to my YouTube channel and to also leave a comment below. I always love to hear from you. I respond to what you say, and for you to share this with anyone that you think would find it helpful and inspiring. So I'm sending you all blessings and love during this time. And thank you so much for being on this cosmic journey with me and this very human journey. All right, everyone. Until next time, thank you so much.